G'day everyone and welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez welcoming you back to our ongoing series of podcasts around the leadership issue. Today I've got the pleasure of being joined by a CEO in the commercial seafood space from Tasmania. My guest today is the CEO of the Tasmanian Rock Lobster Fishermen's Association. Can I welcome to the podcast John Samson? How are you, John?
Very well, thanks, Eric.
Mate, thank you for joining us today. Look, I'll get us started where I typically get these podcasts started, and it's by asking you, in which industry was your first leadership role and why did you take that on, John?
First leadership role was in Tasmanian rock lobster fishery. Basically, I took a role on through frustration, I suppose you'd say, Eric.
Okay. Can you unpack that a bit for us?
Well, frustration that things weren't happening in the industry the way I thought they should be happening. And they weren't happening fast enough, I suppose, is the point. So you sort of get involved, and before long, you get sort of pushed to the top because some people don't want to be in the front row, but they like someone else to be in the front row, so you get pushed forward. And you take that leadership role because you're acting not only on your own behalf, but on behalf of people who support you to get things done within the fishery that you want to see achieved.
Okay, so at that point, you were working as a commercial fisher, and that's what kind of drove you to take on the role, yeah?
Pretty much, mate, yeah. Commercial fisherman for 40 years, Eric.
Oh, wow, okay. Well, there you go. Multi-generational fisher. Is your family involved in the industry, or are you the last to be in this fishery?
I was the first and the last in my particular family, Eric, yes. None of my children want to take it on, probably because they're all girls. But yeah, apart from that, I was the only one.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. So John, in your experience in your travels, particularly in the CEO role, have you found much of a difference, or is there a difference between the leadership and management function?
Well, there is, because when you're a leader of a group of people, especially if you're elected, they have certain aspirations that they want you to see you fulfill for them. Sometimes management roles are a little bit separate from that. You might have different goals within the management. In one particular, in my particular organisation, I'm representing the interests of my members, and they're about, they're expected users. They want to make the best of their investment out of the game within the parameters of sustainability, of course. And sometimes that doesn't always fit in with the way the regulators want to manage the fishery. So they are separate in a way, and I think the challenge of the job actually is making sure that you get something out of those two parameters.
Leaders sometimes make mistakes. So how do you, John, engage with an error or mistake that's attributed to your leadership, mate?
Well, the best thing I found is if you make a mistake, you own up to it straight away and say, mea culpa. You don't try and find excuses to why it happened or whatever. You just say, look, I did it. It's me. And, if we want to then have an investigation as to why, how or where or whatever, that's fine. But I think you've got to own up to it straight away. Otherwise, you do sort of lose your credibility if you're trying to find excuses or hide behind something else as to why it happened.
So dealing with it quickly. Look, so some others on the podcast, leaders from other sectors, have said exactly what you said, but they've also mentioned that they look at it at times, I guess depending on, always a context thing, depending on the kind of mistake that we're talking about, that it offers an opportunity to learn from that incident. Do you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. If you don't learn from your mistakes, you're doomed to fail again. It's as simple as that. You've got to treat each mistake as a learning curve and say, okay, imprint it on your brain. Don't do that again.
Sure.
And if you do it more than once, you just you're asking to lose your leadership virtually.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, fair enough. Okay. So on again, and this is a good segue into the next question. What's the most difficult part about being a leader, John?
The most difficult part, and it never changes, Eric, is the fact that you're probably working for the majority in an industry, and it's the minorities who feel disenfranchised with decisions and outcomes, and how you deal with those people, because you're in the fishing industry, so and they're basically the type of person who is they're big, tough, and strong, and they like to get their own way, because that's what it takes to get ahead in this industry. You've got to be a little bit like that when you're a wild fisherman. And yeah, they don't take losing very easily. And, you know, if they do lose, sometimes it's a financial loss to them as well. So there's other things attached to it. I mean, you know, mental health issues and all sorts of things these days. And you've got to take that into account with the decisions that are made. And how do you help the people who are disenfranchised with those decisions? Because you can't just forget them and leave them behind.
I'd like to thank you, John, because that's an interesting point, and it's one that has been brought up not all the time across the podcast, and I guess it's just a function of the question. But that issue about representing individuals and that they've got a stake in whatever industry that you're talking about, and you know, in industries like ours. So again, for the podcast listeners, I work in the same industry as John here in Queensland, and yeah, we're representing small to micro businesses who have got in some cases, significant investments in their fishery, or their investment may not be so much significant in terms of dollars, but they fish where they live, and so it's important that their businesses stay viable, and that comes back to in part, yeah, the leadership of the organisation that they're part of, and you know, are you representing them in the best way that you can? And yeah, it's often been said on the podcast, John, I'd like to get your take on this, that being the CEO, being in the role that you are, can often be a lonely game. Does that ring true?
Oh, look, it is. And my predecessor told me once that, you know, you definitely can't please all the people all the time. And you know, you're probably looking at a third, and a third. A third appreciate what you do and say thank you. A third don't really care, and a third of the disenfranchised ones, and they just hate you. So you just got to get on with
it. Yeah, that's a nice way to cut that up. Actually, I hadn't heard that before. I'll use that in the future, mate. So let's go on to something a bit more positive then. So how do you measure success as a leader, John?
Oh, geez, Eric, how do you measure success? I suppose if you get an outcome that most people are happy with, and it's what industry wanted, I suppose I count that as a success. I mean, we have all sorts of interesting things going on here at the moment. We're rebuilding the biomass, which is really great, and people are catching their fish, you know, faster than they ever done before because the biomass is better, and that's a really good outcome. But with that success, you sometimes become victims of that success, and we're having a few problems with resource sharing with recreational fishermen, who are also enjoying the fruits of our stock rebuilding and finding it's easier to catch fish, and they want to have more too. And so we get down to the political situation where governments have to make choices about who gets what. And the moment we're having you'd say just a little bit of, I'm trying to be delicate here, I suppose, aren't I? A few problems with the government about which way those shares should be. Should they stay the same or should they change?
For the sake of the listeners, the issue that John is talking about, and I can bring a Queensland perspective because if it's a hot topic in Tasmania, you don't have to go into any details, John, so I understand that. So resource sharing is one of the issues in this industry that is a bugbear for anyone in the commercial sector, because unlike our cousins on the land, we share the resource with the recreational fishing lobby and to be fair, the charter sector and Indigenous fishers, and that I think is the norm around the country. I'm not quite sure if that if those four groups are key groups in Tasmania, but definitely it's about sharing the resource. And unfortunately, when you get to bountiful stocks and industry's done the right thing, then yeah, we get into arguments about who's fish or who belongs to what and who has more claim than others. It can make the job quite difficult. And again, more power to you if as industry you've led them to a point where you've got an abundant fishery, then yeah, it's a great outcome.
Oh, well, it is. I was just having to think while you were talking to me and saying it's a great outcome because we have rebuilt the resources. Problems I have these days are probably the fact that we have social media and those sorts of networks at the moment, and it's extremely hard to deal with some of the claims and some of the stuff that's said on social media where there's no facts or reasons to back up any of the claims that are made. And I find it very difficult if I'm going to government to say something. I've got to have all the facts at my fingertips. I've got to have the science to back it up and everything else. And yet some of those other groups who aren't actually represented, but because they've got some Facebook following or something like that, get credence from politicians. And I struggle with that.
John, one thing I want to ask you, because I know you've been in the industry for a long time, and I didn't realize it was 4 decades. So I think you'll bring some interesting responses to this. I've got a statement here, and I'd like to get your view on it. I've got a couple, actually. The first one being, on-the-job experience develops better leaders. Have you found that in your travels?
Well, it certainly gives you better understanding of where the fishermen are coming from if you've been part of the clan, I suppose you'd say. I was having a talk about this not so long ago because my tenure's going to be up in a few months' time and I'm going to retire. And we've been talking about succession for the last couple of years and, where do we go with that succession? And I'm saying, well, do you really need a fisherman to be doing this job, or an ex-fisherman or a retired fisherman? Time has come, I think, that government and managers do have an appreciation now of the fishing industry as such. You don't have to prove any points by being a fisherman. You're looking for someone who's probably a little bit more academically inclined to push policies rather than, the old style fisherman in his sou'wester banging his fist on the table and shouting at some regulator that you're not listening to me, you're not understanding how I work, or those sorts of things. Or, I think that time's gone now. And, the new breed of representatives will be young, keen, avid individuals probably with university degrees. And that's just the way things go.
And thank you, because that segues nicely into the next statement. I think I've got your view on it, but I won't speak for you, obviously. Formal education helps to develop better leaders.
I don't know whether I actually agree with that wholly. I mean, I've seen some people who are not very well educated in their own mind. They've probably been to the University of Life, but they haven't actually had the academic training. And they've been great advocates for the industry. But they're probably highly intelligent in their own right. They just haven't had the opportunity to go to university or go to school. I mean, probably left school when they were 14 and went fishing on Dad's boat. And, that's just the way this industry goes. And doesn't say they're not bright. They're probably very bright. And as they get older, they form those advocacy roles. And they're really important, especially in, small fishing communities. You need leaders coming from those to advocate for the people's rights. But as I said, it's the time for that sort of gone now. I mean, we're getting young blokes we identify and putting them through leadership courses to try and help them, develop that aspect of, standing up in front of the public and talking and advocating that, we're not rapers and pillagers of the ocean. We're all about sustainability because it's the future of the industry. Without the sustainability, you've got nothing. And you've got to get that message out there. And that's just, the future and the new people that are coming through. So unless a fisherman has those sorts of aspirations and can go through those sort of leadership courses and get to where he wants to go, other than that, I mean, even here in Tasmania with the Seafood Industry Council, I mean, the chief executive of that has a research background. And that's great. Doesn't mean he doesn't appreciate how fishermen work, because once you start dealing with fishermen and if you're going to do the job well, a bit of noise in the background there from you, Eric. Your children are having what?
Yeah. So sorry about that. I won't be able to edit that one out. I'm at home dad at the moment with both my boys on holiday. So I'm sure that's going to make the listeners laugh out loud. I'm laughing out loud because there's no point in getting too angry. The kids are going to be kids.
That's exactly it, mate. Yeah, enjoy them while they're young, trust me.
Yeah, well, one's 13 and one's 16. And
okay, well, they're interesting ages, I can tell you.
Yeah, look, it's interesting is a nice way to say it. I won't use some of the other words that come to mind with those age brackets. But look, I appreciate your response on that, and the fact that you've and thank you for sharing that you're going to retire, and there's going to be, I guess, what you call that succession planning. That good leaders, and I think you've done this by spelling it out, that you're looking to see what are the next level of qualifications and experiences you need in the person that's going to do your job once you move on, because all of us bring different things to the role in leadership, whether it's a CEO or whether you're a manager or you're leading massive teams, or whether you're leading small teams, or you're working on your own, like I think you do there, like I do with my association. That planning for the next person and handing the baton over to get a fresher and different perspective on the role is important, and recognizing that, because I guess us, and I'll use us as an example. I'm at a different stage of my career than yourself, obviously, because you're saying you're transitioning on to retire. For me, looking for that next person, I'm a little bit of two minds about who would be the best person to take on the role here from me, because this role has been primarily filled by people that aren't commercial fisher people, but maybe the next CEO or executive officer, whatever they call the position, could be someone from industry who's got some fishing experience and maybe has had some university training. You don't necessarily need both to give the job a go. I think it's like you said, being able to be a passionate advocate for what it is that you do is important. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, and then you've got to have the art of communication, because you're communicating with fishermen, and you're communicating with regulators, and even with ministers. So you've got to be able to relate to those three demographics.
Okay, look, John, here's the last statement, and I'd really keen to hear what you got to say to this one. Leaders are born, not made.
No, I don't agree with that. You can identify someone and urge them to participate, and then sometimes they very reluctantly come along until I get what I call bitten by the bug. And trust me, it is a bug. And once it gets hold of you, mate, you go on, you're lost. You're going to be a leader or a representative of some sort for the rest of your life, virtually. And it's not only in your chosen field. You usually branch out into other areas as well.
Sure. Yeah. So let me unpack that just a little bit, because I'm interested in your view on that. So once you start getting into leadership roles, have you found that snowballs to other leadership positions in other industries or other sectors or wherever your life is taking you, that it opens up some doors in that sense?
It definitely, yes, it does. And sometimes you've got to sit back and say, "Hey, okay, I've only got a certain amount of hours in the day, and I can't do them all." So you've got to be a little bit careful about what you're going to choose to do. But it seems to be that whatever you get involved with, the mind starts turning over and using the things that you've learnt along the way of, and how you can improve what you're involved in. And as I said, it just gets a hold of you, and you can't help yourself.
Let me put an additional question to you, because you brought something up that I don't think I've ever asked in these podcasts. Is, do you think it's a skill that you can build over time that gives you the ability to say no? Like, do you find saying no difficult?
Oh, look, you do, and you're right. You've got to discipline yourself. I mean, I get a lot of phone calls from people who, as I mentioned earlier on, the disenfranchised people when some decisions come through. And you've got to try and help them get over their anger for a start, and get them to deal with the problem that they're now faced with and which way to go. That can take some doing. And sometimes some of those people are just so angry, if you're going to be like that, I can't help you, And not because you don't want to, it's just because unless they put that anger aside, you're not going to get anywhere with them. Yeah, you've got to learn to know what you can do and know your limitations, I think.
Yeah, this industry is a good one, as in the commercial seafood industry is a good one to learn how to deal with some very angry people or people that have been disappointed by the decisions of the government of the day, and then trying to navigate that for them for what it means is a difficulty, but also builds that level of understanding and being able to sit back and builds the resilience in you as a leader, because you've got to be dealing with this on a regular basis. So I can understand that. Look, John, here's and we're almost at the end here, but the next questions are around some of the work that I'm doing in my studies at the moment. So I'm looking at two key, what I'm calling key leadership capabilities in leaders in the agricultural sector, that being strategic thinking and foresight. Again, from your experience in the seafood industry, where do you place the importance, if any, on strategic thinking and foresight as leader capabilities?
Look, you've got to be able to have that strategic outlook. You've got to know where you're going for a start. So, took a while for our organisation to get its head around that we really needed a strategic plan and work out what our priorities were and how to get there and measure how we were going along the way. But most of the job, of course, is dealing with the day-to-day things that are going on within the fishery. And you've got to align those up towards your strategic goals. And most of the members don't actually really get that. They've got a problem they want you to solve on the day. And making sure that those answers and outcomes align with your strategic goals can be something difficult sometimes, but you've got to put that as your main priority, because that's why you have a strategic plan, because you've got an end goal where you want to get to, and you've got to be doing things along the way which keep you on that track to get there. And it can be difficult sometimes. You know, you have some fisherman's wife ringing up saying that, you know, they've struck a problem. You know, they've put all their money in this investment, and the government's made a decision, and now it looks a bit dodgy. What are they going to do? And you think, geez, you know, what can I say? What can I do here? And you've got to advise them on how they can go about trying to solve the problem that they're in. I mean, I probably can't solve it. I've just got to find some direction to point them into so that they can get the help that they need to try and come to an outcome. And you can't kid yourself that you're not in business, because that's what it is. It's a business. We like to think that it's a lifestyle, and it is to a certain extent, but, you know, at the end of the day, you're still running a business. If it's not financially viable, you can't go to see buying yourself a job every time you go fishing, because, you know, the inevitable outcome's a bad one. And you've got to be able to point some people in the direction to get some help where they can actually see that outcome and say, well, you know, let's not go there. Let's make the decisions earlier rather than too late. Thankfully, we don't have to deal with that very often, but, you know, there are cases where you've got to deal with those sort of people. And, you know, that's what's one of the hardest parts, I think, of the whole job.
Thank you for sharing that, and that's part and parcel of the nature of the kind of work that you do. So at least I can speak for myself. I can relate to everything that you're saying there. John, look, the final question I've got here is more sort of casting your mind back to when you first got into industry. What might you say to a younger version of yourself about being an effective leader?
Run a mile. Oh, no. As I said, to me, it was a bit of a bug. I got bitten by a bug. But if you... look, I've got, without mentioning names, I've got a young fellow I'm trying to groom at the moment who is really great. And I just, because he's at the stage of his life where he's young, he's invested all his money, he's got to work his bum off to get where he wants to go in a few years before he's paid everything off. Then he starts to reap the rewards of that investment. And trying to get him to take on a leadership role at the same time can be a little bit difficult. I think that's one of the problems we have in the fishing industry, is that it's not until these young blokes end up being in their 40s that they've actually managed to pay off all the debt, and they can take it a little bit easier and have a bit more time to do the things that they want to do. But, you know, they're not young people anymore. We keep telling everybody that, you know, you're young, and they say, yeah, but I'm in my 40s. And I have to say, well, compared to me, you are young, but, you know.
Yeah.
But that's one of the realities about leadership. Getting people to young is difficult, because, you know, they're just tied up so much in their own life and their own business that they haven't got the time.
Yeah, and yeah, that's very much a reflection of this industry in particular. So look, John, thank you for your time today, and just for, again, to let the listeners know that I've been speaking with John Samson, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Tasmanian Rock Lobster Fishermen's Association. Mate, I appreciate your time. And just before you do go, you did mention you're going to retire. Look, thank you for your service to industry. I'm sure those in Tasmania have said that to you along the way, knowing that you're going to retire. But look, you know, 40 years invested in industry, and working for a representative body, actually coming from the fisherman fraternity itself is a good thing, and it's good to see that you've been able to give something back. So, yeah, I'd like to say thank you for your service to industry, mate. Oh,
that's all right. Thanks very much, Eric. Look, I must say I've actually really enjoyed the ride. I'm just going to add one more thing about the most satisfying part of the job, is that when you do have one of those individuals who comes along with a problem, and you can actually solve it for them and get a good outcome, And you just see the look on their face that when they first came in, they were hopelessly lost and thought everything was going down the gurgler. And you got a result for them, and they're just so appreciative. And I think that gives you a bit of a glow inside that that's what you're really here for.
Nice, and that's a really good way to end the podcast. So thank you again, John, and for the listeners, this has been Talking Leadership with me, Eric Perez. Thank you again for your time, and I'll catch you all in the next podcast.